It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today. Happy Friday. Coming up on today's show, our colleague Liam Quigley, a reporter at WNYC and Gothamist, will share his investigation into New York City's tow truck industry. He found some unscrupulous business practices that's impacting street safety, insurance payouts, and more. Plus, later in the show, New York Times editorial board member Binyamin Applebaum will talk about how the drop in immigrants coming to this country does not necessarily mean more jobs for Americans. And ahead of Valentine's Day, we'll wrap today's show with a conversation about money for you couples out there. How do you navigate it, both when you're just starting to date and when you've been together for a while? We'll have a personal finance writer share some tips for how to manage money with your honey. But first, today's the deadline for Congress to fund the Department of Homeland Security. And by all accounts, there's no deal coming on the Democrats' demand for reforms in the wake of the shooting deaths of two protesters in Minneapolis. But meanwhile, border czar Tom Homan announced the immigration enforcement surge has ended.
We've had great success with this operation, and we're leaving Minnesota safer.
Border czar Tom Homan press conference announcing end of Minnesota surge. And we're going to talk about these developments, plus the importance of the House vote to end the tariffs President Trump imposed on Canada last year, and more with Susan Page, USA Today Washington bureau chief and the author of several books, including her latest, which is due out in April, called The Queen and Her Presidents. Welcome back to the show, Susan.
It's great to be back with you.
So starting with today's deadline for funding DHS, let's talk about how we got here. It was after the shooting deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis that Democrats demanded reforms to how immigration enforcement officers conduct operations before they'd go along with funding the government when that came up for a vote at the end of last month. And the solution was to carve out DHS funding to give them time to negotiate with the White House on reforms. So where do those negotiations stand, if they still do?
Well, they'll have to negotiate because they'll eventually want to open the government up again. But the negotiations are stalemated now. And there is no prospect that the shutdown, the partial shutdown at midnight, can be avoided because Congress has left town for a week. So we've got at least a week shutdown ahead of us for the Department of Homeland Security. And on some of the fundamental issues like can ICE agents wear masks and should they be required to have judicial warrants before they go into someone's home, those are issues that are not at all resolved.
How far apart are they? I mean, you're saying stalemate, and you brought up the requests for agents not being masked. There's also needing warrant for arrests. That's on the Democrats' 10 items they had on their list. Was there a White House counteroffer?
Yeah, well, there have been some efforts by the White House to offer some compromises, including on provisions like body cameras on agents. That's something the department is now moving toward doing, but they're still pretty far apart. And one thing that I think makes negotiations harder is that both sides see some political advantages to the position they're taking, the unyielding position they're taking, and that usually is a sign that this is going to go on for a while.
Is there any common ground?
Well, there's a bit of common ground. You know, the idea of body cameras, that's something that's endorsed by everybody. But on the kind of the big fundamental issues, which would be, does there need to be a major reset on how ICE agents behave? There is not much common ground on that.
Okay. So Senate Democrats are able to block these bills because of the filibuster, which means that Republicans need to get 60 votes to pass a bill, which would require some Democrats to go along, right?
Right. They got one Democrat in the vote yesterday, John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, who does sometimes vote with the Republicans, but no other. So you're going to have some significant progress be made. And probably need to have some significant pain being shown from a shutdown to really push the negotiators together. And that may take a while because while much of this department is going to be shut down, technically shut down. That does not include ICE. ICE has plenty of funding. It does include the TSA. Now, that's been, when there's problems with the TSA, that has provided a lot of public pressure to make a deal on these shutdowns. But TSA agents, most of them will be required to show up to work, even though their paycheck is going to be delayed. That's the same situation they faced in the last shutdown, which was a blink of an eye ago.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when you talk about the political advantages to the stalemates in some ways, but that also makes me wonder about the narratives that each side is trying to control to justify the stalemate. So can you talk about that a little bit? What are both sides saying is the reason for no deal?
Well, the Democrats are focusing on the abuses that they point to in Minneapolis, including the shooting death of 2 U.S. citizens. And that it is really the outrage about that led us to the willingness to Democrats to stand up on this. But President Trump and Republicans point to a desire to back up law enforcement. And they also point out the simple fact that ICE funding is not affected by this because ICE got so much money in what's called the Big Beautiful Bill last year that they won't need money for a long period of time. For Democrats, so this is the point of leverage that they have, and so this is the point of leverage that they plan to use.
This is the Brian Lehrer Show. I'm Kusha Navidar, a host here at WNYC. I'm filling in for Brian today. My guest is USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page. Do you listening right now have a question about this DHS shutdown or other news from Washington for my guest, Susan Page? Is the trade-off of maybe longer lines at airports if fewer TSA agents are working, is that worth it if it leads to more rules for immigration enforcement actions? Text or call us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Do you support the Democrats digging in on this issue? And as Susan is saying, using the point of leverage that they have. Tell us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Susan, we just got a text come in that I'd love to get your take on. It says, how do Republicans defend not wanting agents to wear uniforms, identification, and no masks?
So their response to that is that that they've had incidents where agents who are identified, who have a name tag, or even whose face is exposed to cameras, have been identified and doxxed, and their families, they've been threatened. Their families have been threatened, and so that is the argument against setting a rule that you can't wear a mask if you're out there doing enforcement actions.
So safety concerns for the agents.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And Congress is not in session next week. So if no deal can be reached today, when would funding run out and when would the next vote happen?
Hours from now. For hours from now, from funding for the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security agencies that are covered, like the TSA and the Coast Guard and FEMA. But, it's almost like these government shutdowns have lost their ability to shock. I remember back like during the Clinton administration, there was a big shutdown involving President Clinton and Newt Gingrich, who was then the Speaker of the House. And it was seen as a cataclysmic development, and we covered every minute of it. And now these shutdowns have become more common, and the workarounds have become more familiar. And government workers, I think, surely don't like showing up without a paycheck coming anytime soon, but that's something that's become familiar. So I think that's become kind of I wonder if you think that, Kusha, or if your listeners do, if it's just not as big a deal as it once was.
It's such an interesting perspective. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself as well, like, yeah, government shutdowns have just become more of the norm. I'm wondering for you, Susan, does the way that you cover that, has that changed at all given the frequency of it over the years of your career?
Yeah, we've become much more familiar with covering it.
Yeah.
And we still cover it. And it does, like these TSA agents, one of the stories that we pursued in the last shutdown was how the TSA agents were required to show up to work, but they weren't getting paid. And the shutdown lasted for 43 days, which is a long time to go without a paycheck. And some of them were taking second jobs because they wanted to pay the rent and buy groceries for their families. And then that would run into the requirement they had to show up to work. So it is still a serious matter, but it's a sign that I think, before in shutdowns, it was seen as this alarming sign of a dysfunctional government.
Right, yeah.
And I think Americans now think, yeah, the government's dysfunctional. Tell me something I don't know.
And that's, do you find some tragedy in there? I mean, I don't want to editorialize too much, but like the government shutting down is not generally a good thing. And if it becomes acceptable and even a point of political leverage, as you're saying, that has so many downstream effects, right?
Yeah. Well, it can't be a surprise to any of your very well-informed listeners that the government's pretty dysfunctional, that the idea of bipartisan action on the biggest problems that we face has become a pretty scarce commodity. And this is just one aspect, I think, of that phenomenon.
Mm. Listeners, if you want to get in on the conversation, give us a call, send us a text, 212-433-9692. That's 212-433-WNYC. Susan, we've got another text here. It says, maybe Susan can answer. In terms of these safety concerns for the masked agents with no identification, I'd like to know if there's any evidence supporting that claim. Please let us know. What do you think?
Yes, well, the government officials say that this has happened, and it's an experience that some other agents have had. That's not a story I personally have done. I haven't talked to agents for whom this has happened, but the safety of agents is something we want to protect as well, right? These are federal law enforcement officials. We don't want them or their families doxxed and harassed. So I guess I don't personally know, but the officials at the White House and at the agency do say this is an experience that some of their agents have had. I wonder if there are any ICE agents or their family members who are listening who might illuminate for us if they've had that experience. I'd be very interested in hearing that.
Absolutely. If that sounds like you listening right now, please do give us a call, send us a text, Susan. I think that's a fantastic idea. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. I'd love to bring in a caller here who has a question. Ben from Ditmas Park. Ben, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. This may feel a bit off topic, and of course immigration is the topic of the moment and extremely important to be resolved. I'm glad the Democrats are fighting. But the last time we were dealing with a government shutdown, it was sort of over this question of healthcare subsidies being extended. And as an American whose health insurance went up $600 a month, whose monthly premium went up $600 a month, I'm sort of wondering, is that conversation over? Are those subsidies just not going to be extended? Is there any conversation about that in this shutdown or in future negotiations, or should I just lose all hope and accept my $800 monthly premium? Anyway, thanks.
Ben, thank you so much. And great to shift the topic a little bit and still sticking to this discussion about government shutdown. So, Susan, do you have any sense about that? Sounds like Ben's health insurance has gone up a lot. I think you said by more than $600 a month.
Yeah, Ben, that sounds terrible. An experience that millions of Americans have had, this spike in premium costs. If your premiums have gone from $200 a month to $600 a month, that is really an extraordinary jump. And one of the things that we saw were some Americans who had been covered by the Affordable Care Act did not sign up again in January because of the spike in premiums. And some Americans, we think, didn't realize how much their premiums were going to go up until the bills started to arrive in January. So we're still watching the statistics on what the impact is on healthcare coverage. Ben, I don't think you should lose all hope, but I think you should probably lose all hope for this year, because the Democrats hung pretty tough on the issue of the premiums, but they were not extended, and so it has now become not something that is going to get acted on. It's something that will be talked about. It'll be one of the issues that Democrats focus on in this midterm election year. And if it's going to get addressed again, it will be that I suspect it will not be until next year.
Ben, thank you so much for that call. Okay, let's move on from the shutdown and go a little bit into Minnesota. So border czar Tom Homan's announcement that Operation Metro Surge is ending in Minnesota. He's saying only a small number of federal agents will remain. He spoke of the successful results from the surge, but it exacted a human toll and a political one for the president, right, Susan?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he sort of declared victory and left town. There was a time when that was a suggestion on the Vietnam War to say we won and leave. That is not exactly what the feds did in Minneapolis, but it sort of is, because the furor over the behavior of ICE agents, and particularly the murder of 2 Americans, created a national firestorm that the White House is still dealing with, and prompted, I think, the withdrawal of most of these federal immigration agents out of Minneapolis. Homan said they had arrested more than 4,000 undocumented immigrants, but he could not break down how many had been convicted of serious crimes, which is the group of people that President Trump initially said he was targeting with immigration enforcement. Some of them are undocumented but had no other crime. And of course, we saw abuses, the arrest of U.S. citizens and the abuse of those thousands of protesters we saw on Minneapolis streets.
Yeah. I want to talk about the polling a little bit and how it might be affecting the president. Is President Trump responding to polling that shows support for his immigration policies dropping?
He is, as presidents tend to do.
Sure.
Presidents tend to pay a lot of attention to their approval ratings. And President Trump's approval rating on handling the southern border is really positive. The fact that we see not very much illegal immigration across the border with Mexico is something that Americans broadly support. But the tactics on the streets in Los Angeles and Minneapolis and elsewhere has been very unpopular, and it's dismayed people who supported President Trump in the last election. And it's caused some significant problems for President Trump and Republicans generally with Hispanic voters, which is a group of voters they did very well with. I've heard from a Republican member of Congress that Republican women are a group that he's hearing from that don't like what they've seen on the streets of Minneapolis, including, for instance, the detention of that little 5-year-old boy in a bunny hat. And that is one of the enduring images of the immigration crackdown. So I think that undoubtedly played a part in the administration's decision to, one, send Tom Homan there to try to lower the temperature, and number 2, to say everything's great now and we can come home.
Yeah. We've got a caller in Newark, New Jersey. Tim, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, my question is regarding ICE being docked. Now, our regular law enforcement, they wear their badges with their names and their badge numbers on their uniforms. They're not permitted to wear masks. Now, why is it that they are not allowed to wear masks and they have to wear uniforms? And why are we taking special precautions for ICE and not our regular law enforcement?
Tim, thanks so much for that question. It sounds like you're asking about why is ICE getting maybe special preferential treatment. Susan, is it the safety concerns? Is it something else?
Well, I think Tim asked a great question, and that's a question that congressional Democrats have been asking as they do these negotiations on spending, that the standard practice has been not to have a kind of mystery police force out there. And that while you want to take steps that protect law enforcement officials, just the image of these enforcement agents, heavily armed enforcement agents with masks over their face and no identifying information on their uniform is one that has just really set off alarms for a lot of Americans. So they are asking the same question Tim is, which is if there's a way to make that work for law enforcement, for local and state law enforcement officials, why not also come up with a solution that works for ICE?
Let's go to Polly in Brooklyn, if we could get Polly on the line as well, because I think Polly might have a follow-up here. Hi, Polly. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. It was a very similar question. I mean, I think I sort of took some issue with the comment, of course we don't want, ICE officials to be, they're federal agents. We don't want them to be like harassed or whatever. And it's not that I want people to be harassed, but they're certainly the least of, in terms of who's getting harassed in this situation. I'd feel least worried about them as I do about, American citizens and immigrant community that's being terrorized. It just seemed like a strange comment that we, of course we want to protect them. I didn't really get the spirit of that.
I hear you.
Well, Holly, we don't want to protect them from protest. Protests are an American tradition, and so I take your point there. But it seems to me we also want a world in which law enforcement officials aren't doxxed and their families aren't called and their homes aren't. I mean, it seems to me we want to have the protest be directed at the offense, so that, and man, that is really what we saw. Minneapolis has a long tradition of protest and political activism, and we really saw that on the streets of Minneapolis to some great effect. I think that's one of the reasons that the ICE surge has been but pulled back. So that is not how I would define harassment. But I guess I don't think law enforcement officials of any sort. I think they need to do their jobs in the right way. But I guess I'm just generally against political violence against anybody, against activists on the street, or against agents with their families.
It's an important discussion to be having right now. And Polly, we really do appreciate you bringing that to light, and Susan for you engaging in that. We're getting a lot of texts on this topic. We've got some folks that are asking, again, is there evidence of any actual danger to ICE agents, which we discussed, Susan. We're hearing some folks saying, how come no other law enforcement, police officers, other federal officers, and our military don't wear masks? Couldn't they also be doxxed? So a lot of folks wondering why the preferential treatment here and the evidence for it. Folks, we're talking to Susan Page from Washington Post, Susan. We're talking to Susan Page from USA Today, the Washington bureau chief. We're discussing what's happening in politics right now. If you have a question or you have a comment, please give us a call or send us a text, 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with more. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today, speaking with USA Today Washington bureau chief Susan Page. Susan, let's change gears a little bit. President Trump suffered another setback this week when the House voted to rescind the tariffs he put in place on Canadian trade. Let's talk about that for a second. Is this a turning point for Congress, being a check on presidential power, or is that kind of overstating the case?
Well, it's an action that will have no substantive impact, but sends this huge message. Because what happened was 6 Republicans joined just about all the Democrats to pass this resolution that's aimed at reversing the tariffs on Canada. Now, this is not going to happen. If this legislation ever reached the White House, President Trump would surely veto it. But there is a big message here. It is one more sign of several that shows President Trump losing some of his grip on Congress. He still has a pretty strong grip on Congress. We shouldn't say he hasn't, but there is a little bit more willingness on the part of congressional Republicans to challenge President Trump or not to do what he's saying they should do or to risk his wrath. That's been pretty dangerous territory for Republicans last year because President Trump made it clear he would seek retribution against Republican office holders who defied him. But you see it a little bit more. And I think there are 2 reasons. I think, for one thing, the president is a lame duck, and that will be even more the case after the midterm elections. And the other factor are those midterm elections where Trump will not be on the ballot, but a third of the Senate and all of the House will be. And they are looking at their own political standing in their districts and splitting with Trump on some of the things that he does that cause the most consternation among their voters.
So while the president is in his last term and is a lame duck, simultaneously, these House Republicans are getting ready for midterms where they feel the pressure, to kind of summarize that. Is that a fair encapsulation?
That's right. And there's, of course, it's in President Trump's interest to have Republicans do well in the midterms, but it's not his job on the line. And there's a long history of presidents thinking more about their own legacy than thinking about the prospects for the people who are in their party and going to be on the ballot in a midterm election. It's not the first time members of Congress have been a little concerned about how the president of their own party is going to handle things. Trump still has a lot of clout. He has a ton of money, more money than we've ever seen a president have to give in elections if he chooses to do that. But President Trump has become he's lost his approval rating, has been sinking into the low 40s and even into the 30s in some polls. That's pretty low for members of Congress looking at running again. And on things like this immigration crackdown, he has encountered increasingly negative poll ratings. And most important in all, of course, economic anxiety is one of the factors that we think will be most important in November.
Yeah. Impeachment comes to mind as well for President Trump. I mean, is he worried about impeachment if Dems take control?
Well, I think he would prefer not to be impeached.
Sure. You don't say.
Now, on the other hand, I think not much prospect he's going to get ousted from office. We've discovered that with impeachment. It's easier to impeach in the House than it is to convict in the Senate. So I think he has at times mentioned his desire not to be impeached and how that'll happen if Democrats win the House. I don't know how the Democratic calculation will go if they win control of the House, which is probably going to happen, not guaranteed, but probably going to happen. It was a mixed political blessing for them during his first term. So I don't think that's necessarily inevitable, but it definitely won't happen if the Republicans keep control of the House, and it is at least in the realm of possibility if the Democrats gain control again.
Yeah. How about on the Senate side? I mean, some Senate Republicans have also voted against tariffs. Would there be enough votes to override a veto?
No, there would not be enough vote. It is very hard for me to see the possibility that they could get enough votes to override a veto on a tariffs bill. The fact is, we think 6 House Republicans voting with Democrats on tariffs was a big victory for the Democrats, but it's still only 6 Republicans.
Yeah. As you're talking about President Trump's perspective on things, it reminds me of something that you've written about, which is the so-called second term curse. What is that? And are these signs of it?
I looked back and I couldn't find any modern president whose second term was as good as his first. And I think there are a couple reasons why. And one big reason is that I think in their second terms, we can see historically Republicans tend to overreach. It was in his second term that FDR tried to stack the Supreme Court. That didn't work out. It was in his second term that George W. Bush proposed a partial privatization of Social Security, which proved to be a political disaster. And it's in his second term that we see President Trump taking much more aggressive and broad actions than he took in his first term on things, including tariffs and immigration enforcement. And I think that tends to rebound against presidents in their second terms. And I think you can see some signs of that in President Trump's second term as well.
Listeners, are you seeing signs of a change in direction in Washington, what Susan calls the second term curse? Call us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. And talk with us. This is The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, and we are speaking with USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page. Susan, there is also the federal court ruling blocking War Secretary Pete Hegseth from retaliating against Senator Mark Kelly over a video he and 5 other Democratic lawmakers recorded. What was in that video?
Well, this was a video that had Democrats all of whom had served in the military or in intelligence agencies, stating the fact that military people in the armed forces are required to defy illegal orders. And didn't define what an illegal order was. This was at the point where we were first seeing those strikes on boats leaving Venezuela that were being, bombed from above by drones, by U.S. drones. But it didn't say what illegal orders were. And it was, of course, stating that is true. People in the military are supposed to defy illegal orders. Two things happened this week on this front that are so interesting. One is the court decision, the federal judge that in really a scathing decision rebuked the defense secretary on his actions to try to punish Mark Kelly for appearing in this video. The thing that was, I thought, even more remarkable was we saw a grand jury in Washington refuse to indict the 6 Democratic lawmakers who made this video. And, there's that old line that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor tells them to. That was not on several occasions has not proved true. And the defiance of a grand jury on what federal prosecutors are urging them to do, I think, is really quite extraordinary.
Let's listen to a clip, and then I'm going to follow up with a question for you, Susan.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens. Like us, you all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad,
but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
So that is a clip from the video that we are discussing. Susan, this ruling came just after a grand jury refused to indict the 6 senators and Congress members over the videos. Do you know what charges the prosecutors were going for?
They were going for a criminal indictment. I actually don't know exactly what the charges were. Maybe one of your listeners do, or maybe you do. I know that the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, accused them of sedition, which of course would be among the most serious charges you can make. But do you know what the actual criminal indictment was sought for?
Not off the top of my head. If listeners do know, they can definitely call in. We'll try to get that immediately. Can you tell us more about what Secretary Hegseth tried to do?
Well, what he has tried to do against Mark Kelly is to discipline him, to lower his rank at the point, lower his rank in the military, that would lower his retirement pay, and use the findings against him in a criminal military proceeding. So his threat against Kelly is a pretty serious one, and especially since Mark Kelly is, number one, a U.S. senator, number two, someone who served with distinction in the Navy, and who was then an astronaut. So he's not. So he's a man with some standing to defy, I think, Defense Secretary Hegseth.
We've got a lot of texts coming in. I just want to read a few of them here, specifically about the second-term curse. We've got one that says here, regarding the second-term curse, all we see is increased unchecked authoritarianism. Another text says, where Trump is concerned, this is not a second-term curse. He simply wised up on what he couldn't do in his first term, feeling thwarted by the people around him. His instincts are the same, and now he has recruited loyalists at all costs to support his policies. So some listeners out there are saying kind of business as usual, same perspective, different time.
You know, the one that you just read, I think, is exactly right. That there is one of the huge contrasts we see between Trump's first term and his second term is that he does not have those guardrails around him of more establishment Republican figures who said things like, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or there'd be consequences to doing that. He really is. It is true that he is surrounded now by people who agree with him and defer to him, and that has made him, I think, more willing to take the kind of really far-reaching things that some people see as extreme actions. And that, when you do that, you risk a rebound. You risk having, for instance, a really terrible midterm election that changes control of the House and even possibly, although with some difficulty, of the Senate. So I think that is one of the things that has happened that makes his second term so different from his first.
And listeners, I appreciate you being able to pivot with us while we're talking about Hegseth, but there's just so many texts coming in about this second term curse that I'd like to touch on that for just one more second, because we have a caller, Nora from Sleepy Hollow, New York, who has a perspective on this. Hi, Nora. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. The guest keeps referring to Trump as a lame duck and says he's in his last term. I mean, does anyone believe he tore down the East Wing and is building a tribute to himself because he plans to leave in 3 years? He wouldn't leave the first time. And this, all of ICE, I mean, the raids, it's to provoke protests to the point where he can declare whatever is called the Insurrection Act and put troops in to control the coming elections. Look how he's taken the ballots from Georgia. I mean, I don't know why everyone assumes that at the end of his term he will go gently into the sweet night, because he didn't do it the first time, and most people will tell you that a failed coup is a dress rehearsal for another one.
Nora, thank you so much for that call. We appreciate it. Susan, I'd love to get your perspective on this. I mean, it's impossible to foresee the future for certain, but I'm sure that a lot of people echo Nora's sentiments about not going.
Well,
anywhere.
I know that there's alarm about that. I hear it from Nora, and it's true that Donald Trump refused and continues to refuse to accept the results of the 2020 election, which was a while ago. He continues to even though that assertion has been debunked by the courts and by investigations, consistently debunked. But it is also true that we have a Constitution and it has a 2-year limit, and so that makes him a lame duck, and maybe things will happen in the future that we'll need to deal with, even things of a very serious nature. But he is a lame duck, and we do have a Constitution, and I believe that the United States will stand behind that.
Yeah. Okay, let's pivot back to the topic that we were just talking about, which is Democratic lawmakers posting a video on X back in November to urge members of military and other agencies to refuse illegal orders, and a grand jury refusing to indict the 6 senators and Congress members over the videos. I want to play a clip of Senator Alyssa Slotkin's reaction to the grand jury's non-action, then get your take on it, Susan. Here is that clip.
Yesterday, 20 anonymous Americans who we will never meet, who made up that grand jury, told us more about the values of America than Jeanine Pirro or Pam Bondi or certainly this president.
So that was 2 days ago. I'm wondering, Senator Alyssa Slotkin on the grand jury that did not indict for the video, saying military members do not need to follow illegal orders. Susan, what do you think when you hear that clip?
I think about what Nora said and the alarm that some Americans have about whether our system's going to hold together. And I think about anonymous people on a grand jury, accustomed to taking at face value what a prosecutor tells them, saying no. And that is the kind of thing that makes me think that our Constitution holds and our country holds, and we have a time of great confrontation and division now, but we have in the past had that as well. And so perhaps I seem naive to Nora, but I believe we get through this.
And yet Secretary Hegseth has promised to appeal the court's ruling stopping the demotion of Senator Kelly. So this doesn't end here, right?
Right. It does not. Not surprising he would appeal it. We'll see. Everything seems to go to the Supreme Court these days. So we'll see what eventually happens with this. But, these 6 Democratic members of Congress, as I said before, all of them veterans of the military or the intelligence services, made that video with the purpose of getting attention to the points they were making. And Pete Hegseth is continuing to shine a spotlight on what it was they were saying.
So we covered so much in just the past couple of weeks of politics. So, Susan, first of all, thank you for pivoting with us and having such a broad scope on this and walking us through it. This might be an unfair question, but to just end things off, what are the vibes? Like, sum up the political calculations. Was this a good week for the president and his policies? What's the feeling right now in Washington?
I think there are some warning signs for President Trump. And part of that is the passage of time. On the other hand, you know what? He got good inflation numbers this morning. The jobs numbers were somewhat soft, but pretty good. And if you're thinking what's going to happen in the midterms, the economy, it's always the economy, stupid.
We have to leave it there for now with Susan Page, USA Today Washington bureau chief and author of The Queen and Her Presidents, which you can pre-order before it comes out in April. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.